What you got in there?
In here?
Parasite Eve.
PlayStation 1 is a console that people have mixed feelings on as a retro system. Some feel it was that time when we first transitioned to 3D, so the games didn't age quite as gracefully as other consoles. And I can admit there is some truth to that, but it seems as though in recent times people have warmed up to it and realized that it has a more distinctive look and style of its time. There's even a renaissance of games coming out emulating its style, and I'm all for that actually. There's just something about limitation breeding creativity that PlayStation 1 just exemplifies so well. This console was an absolute beast, selling over 100 million units, making Nintendo look at it with green envy. They never would have imagined that little gray thing would actually crush the N64 in terms of sales numbers, despite being less powerful on paper, but the PlayStation 1 took advantage of the CD technology quite excellently. The increased storage size of CDs and the ability to split games in multiple discs really benefited the original Nintendo killer. Parasite Eve is definitely such a game that took advantage of this, sporting 2 discs. It's a unique monster, that's for sure, made back in 1998 exclusively for the PlayStation 1. The interesting part though is that in the West we actually wouldn't know this, but the game is somewhat of a movie tie-in, connected to the same universe as the novel of the same name that was published in 1995 by Hideaki Senna, which was adapted into a film in 1997.
I suggested that one marinate.
Parasite Eve, the game, serves as a sequel to that book, but explains the major parts of said book so that those of us who didn't grow up in Nihon can actually understand what the hell is even going on in this game. It's also worth noting that this is Square Enix's very first M-rated game in the States, and you'll see it definitely earned that title. So warning ahead of time, there are some graphic visuals in this video, so if you want to hear about the game without seeing them, you can put this video in the background and just listen along. Parasite Eve is a game that I've definitely always been meaning to play, and now it felt like the time was finally right. One of the great things about doing these videos is they give me a chance to not only jump into some of these backlog games that I have, but that I also get my urge to rave about them out in a video form for others to enjoy, and not just sit there and talk to my wife's ear off about games that she'll likely never play. She is a good sport about it though. I don't really know how many people actually played this game, and from my understanding it was a lesser selling title, selling under just about 2 million units at the time, so I'm going to imagine that a lot of people watching this video have never heard of it or played it, and for that reason I'll try to cover it as best I can without going into obnoxious levels of detail. Sit back and enjoy because we're going back to the Christmas of 1997. Parasite Eve definitely follows the tradition that Square Enix always had, which is trying to do something different with RPG games.
Switch on these fireworks.
And different it does. Combat in Parasite Eve is a mixture of active time battle with some action RPG elements. On the battlefield you can move freely to dodge attacks, but you must wait for your action bar to fill before you can perform your own actions. This actually makes it sort of an evolution of traditional active time battle systems, because you can actually adjust your position while you're waiting for your chance to fight. Weapons have range, and enemies outside that range take reduced damage and have a higher chance of your weapons missing them. So it's about staying within range, but not so much put yourself in the range of their attacks. It's a simple system, but it works well. You do most of your fighting with firearms, as the only melee option of the game is trashed here and should only be used when you're completely out of ammo. But I wouldn't worry about that because I've never found myself in a position where ammo was much of a problem, as ammo is given out plentifully throughout the entire game. Enemies dropped ammo so much that it was almost a joke. What's more odd is that ammo is a singular item that can be used across all guns. It doesn't matter if it's a shotgun, pistol, or even a grenade launcher, they all take the same bullets evidently. Extreme efficiency. If only things were this deficient for the actual NYPD. The ammo mechanic is an interesting one, as weapons also have a clip size, and reloading means you're a sitting duck, so it's advantageous to manually reload after battles. You also have the fire rate to contend with, which is essentially how many times a gun can fire per turn. Keep in mind though, guns that fire more per turn do less damage per shot, but they come with the advantage to be able to shoot more enemies per turn, as you can split up attacks to damage multiple enemies at once. It's very strategic. Guns are your bread and butter for fighting, and you can even upgrade them with mod kits and tools that allow you to transfer stats from one gun to another gun. Naturally, this means your primary source of armor is bulletproof vests, which works similarly in that you can transfer modifications from one to another, but be warned, as the transfer will destroy the one you took the modifications from. This means you might want to hold on to old equipment, as the only other option is to drop it, because this game has no currency system. Yep, there's no money of any kind. so battles are strictly for experience and finding items. So you're going to want to use your storage often, as you have a limit how many items you can carry, and almost no items are stackable. Your carrying capacity increases as you level, but you'll always be somewhat limited on what items you can bring with you. It's sort of like Earthbound, but with slightly less limitations. If you were hoping for party members to carry things for you though, then you're out of luck, as there are no party to speak of. Parasite Eve has you control a singular character the entire game with no backups in combat. It's all about you when it comes to saving Manhattan, so you can only rely on yourself. Seems like a metaphor for real life. There is a magic system in place, but instead of an MP bar you have Parasite energy, which isn't represented by a direct numerical value, but instead by a bar itself. It's a really weird decision given that health is represented by a number, but hey, it's serviceable. Outside of all this, leveling up gives you bonus points, which you can use to power up your weapons, expand your inventory capacity, or increase the speed of which your action bar recharges. It kinda makes you choose how you grow, and I've never seen an RPG where your carrying capacity is directly tied to its own stat. It's kinda interesting. All of this translates to engaging and interesting combat with some equally interesting enemies. Enemy design in Parasite Eve is detailed and horrific at times. As I alluded to earlier, the enemy designs in Parasite Eve are quite horrifying and detailed, which are quite the change of pace for Square Enix, who traditionally stick to more tame themes, showing us that they can make horror games as well. The cutscenes of the game are definitely the star of the show, as Square Enix spared no expense in the visuals, make you feel uneasy about what's going on. They're only that much better now to see in modern times due to the uncanny valley effect that older 3D CGI has. They're a real treat to see, and they incentivize you to keep going as a reward for completing parts of the game. I was compelled to see what came next every time I played, and eager to see how things unfolded. Location-wise, the game doesn't feature many places you can go, but areas you do visit are fleshed out. Unfortunately, the console does show its age, as most of these places are static images as backgrounds with fixed camera angles that give the illusion of three-dimensional depth. And on a modern television without scan lines, they can look a bit odd to see, but it's far from a reason to hate the game, that's for sure. Most emulators these days can emulate scan lines if you really want that classic feeling. This game would definitely benefit a lot from a full-scale remake such as the one Final Fantasy VII got, which ironically Parasite Eve was made on a modified version of the same engine that made the original Final Fantasy VII, but if you're hoping for that, it likely won't ever happen, but we'll get into that. Foreshadowing. The battle system is far from advanced or perfect, but hey, it's easy to get the hang of, though admittedly the menu can be a little bit awkward at times to use. And you're given a handful of items that you're not quite sure if they ever have any importance or not without looking at some kind of guide. Combat-wise, to quote my friend, a VTuber named Bonum Malum,
one of the games that came to mind that I can't help but compare this game's battle system to was Final Fantasy XII. However, unlike this combat system, Final Fantasy XII only gives you the illusion of the freedom Parasite Eve's combat system gives you. Unlike Parasite Eve's combat system, you do have to pick your moves in real time, but with that said, the system is still clearly turn-based as you have to wait for your enemy to attack before you attack. And while you can move around, you cannot dodge. It really makes you wonder why Square Enix even bothered with this kind of system. This is an appalling step backwards when you realize that both games were made by the same company, and Final Fantasy XII was made afterwards. Parasite Eve has the combat system that Final Fantasy XII should have had. I mean, look, I know this is a Parasite Eve video and not a Final Fantasy XII video, but I just had to get this rant out of the way.
Which it does have similarities to that game's combat system. The biggest difference, as stated, between the two that I can personally experience in the Final Fantasy XII in the hour that I did play of it, you actually can't dodge attacks by moving out of the way like you can in Parasite Eve. Who would have thought they'd take a step backward in technology? Again, full disclosure, I've only played like an hour of Final Fantasy XII despite having the collector's edition on my shelf. Still, what they have here is definitely the building blocks of something great, and the game uses this battle system quite wisely. Sure, there aren't that many enemy varieties to fight, but the game makes use of its limited roster very well, and you're always excited to see what you could possibly be next. I've already said it, but the cinematics are a true spectacle to behold, and they definitely put a lot of time and thought into them. They're an excellent reward for completing a section of the game, and give you ample reason to keep going to see what crazy crap is going to happen next. It's almost like a huge action film with these big set pieces. It's also another good example of using the story to create excuses to work within limitations. Despite taking place in Manhattan, there are few NPCs walking around. The real reason is it likely would have just added more development time and took more resource to have tons of NPCs wandering around. After all, New York is one of the most populated cities in the world. But story-wise, they have an excuse that the city was evacuated. It's a good example of working around the limitations of a console. Games like Silent Hill come to mind when I think of that, due to how it used the low render distance as a reason to create the fog, which became synonymous with the series. I actually think I mentioned that before in another video. But it's such a great example. Speaking of story though, we should probably move on to it, but first we have to talk about music. Parasite Eve has a great soundtrack. It's very action techno and it fits the mood so well. This is one of the more memorable soundtracks out there, and if you play this game, you will be hearing this in your head for weeks to come. Here's a snippet of what to expect. However, I don't want to steal all the thunder here, so I brought my VTuber friend to share his thoughts on the game's design. Take it away, Bonum.
Parasite Eve was a game made for the PlayStation released in 1998, and a clearly experimental game at that, from everything from visuals, concept, and gameplay. The 5th generation consoles gave us the first true 3D consoles, and thus was an era that saw a lot of experimentation that spawned or popularized some of the genres in gaming we know and love today. Now, I know it can be difficult to talk about the PlayStation's visuals. For many people, the 5th generation, as it was the first era for 3D graphics, is often seen as the ugliest generation in gaming. However, for some like myself, the visuals of the N64 and PS1, though extremely crude compared to the generations that came after it, and especially by today's standards, there is a charm to these rather minimalist early 3D visuals. I would even go as far as to argue that there are some games that look genuinely good on the PlayStation depending on the art style and the amount of attention to detail. Believe it or not, the PS1 visuals have seen a resurgence as an art style, and has been used in indie titles like Alisa, Bloodwash, Knight's Try, Happy's Humble Burger Barn, Signalis, Lunistis, and Frogan. Which really goes to show you how much of an impact the PS1 had on people. The PS1 was known for being a hub for a couple of genres in particular. RPGs, which, unlike the Nintendo 64 and Saturn, were found in spades on the PlayStation. And survival horror, made popular with the success of Resident Evil. And what happened with Parasite Eve is that Squaresoft was inspired by their own Final Fantasy series and Resident Evil to make a combination of a horror game and an RPG. A horror RPG, if you will. Which is also kind of funny, as this was not the first of its kind. In fact, Resident Evil had its roots in a horror RPG called Sweet Home for the Famicom, which actually holds that title of First Horror RPG. Not only was Sweet Home an experimental horror RPG like Parasite Eve, it was also an adaptation, where Parasite Eve was a direct sequel to a movie and an adaptation of a book by the same name. Sweet Home was a direct adaptation of a movie.
Parasite Eve is a science fiction story about evolution is rooted in scientific theory. Okay, I'll admit the story of this game may seem a bit dated, as it's riddled with science techno-babble that makes no real sense. It relies heavily on the people won't question the science mentality that was prevalent back in the day, as people weren't as hypercritical as they are now. It is possible that the issues with the science jargon not making sense though could have come from being split between American and Japanese development team, and the book the game is based on hadn't even technically been officially translated yet. There is a real possibility that the reason why so much of the science behind the story seems like incoherent gibberish is because of the translation issues, but it's more likely that this is just a case of overestimating people's ability to suspend their belief. I think that's why I love movies like The Thing. A lot of the time the technical aspect isn't even explained in detail, because it's better to let the viewer guess than to give an explanation that's nonsense. However, I have watched the first 10 minutes or so of the film while making the script, and evidently the movie proposed the idea that mitochondria apparently didn't always exist within our cells, and somehow were injected into them or something. Some kind of parasitic life form? Thus, we get the title Parasite Eve. To be honest, I'm not 100% sure, and it's likely this is something that makes more sense if you read the book or watch the film in full, but in these videos I try to go off just the game without too much background information unless I'm covering a sequel, or unique circumstances like in .hack where it was pretty much necessary to understand what was going on. What are your thoughts on this, Bonum?
The story is a bit of a hot mess.
Basically what happens is this. After the events of the film, Aya Brea, a police officer for the NYPD, is on her way to the opera on Christmas Eve 1997. Not sure who goes to the opera on Christmas Eve, but then again, maybe I'm uncultured. Either way, the situation goes bad quickly, and not just because of the terrible acting on stage, because one of the opera singers turns into whatever the hell this thing is. Aya tries to put some lead into it, but it awakens some kind of power within her, allowing Aya to have access to the game's magic system, Parasite energy. Actually, rather than explain the story myself, though, I'm gonna let Bonum take this one. Take it away.
While the story about a New York City cop named Aya and her mission to stop a possessed and mutated opera singer that calls herself Eve and uncovering things about her past along the way is engaging enough, the quote-unquote scientific aspect and the science babblespeak is what drives the game's story completely off the rails. Now, I know there's the suspension of disbelief in entertainment, and that in the 90s, the whole science babble was in everything from Star Trek to Spider-Man the Animated Series. Even this was really pushing it. Now, to avoid spoiling the latter half of the game, an opera singer named Melissa was possessed by this entity named Eve, who is basically a manifestation of the mitochondria. And yes, we are talking about the part of a cell that generates the cell's energy. Basically, what happened was that the mitochondria rebelled against or took over her cell's nucleus, and somehow that ended up creating a superpowered being using Melissa as its host that can somehow burn up or liquefy people and mutate animals in a manner that brings to mind memories of the Thing. Now, if you know your basic high school biology, this sounds absolutely ridiculous, as this is the cell equivalent to the heart or lungs rebelling against and taking over the brain. But to make things even more silly, there's the movie's explanation, which goes, the mitochondria is an alien parasitic organism that has somehow latched onto our cells. Please refer to this Google AI explanation on what the mitochondria does right here. It's like saying our lungs are an alien parasite. The issue is that the game's story tries to over-explain through silly science babble when they really should have just kept things simple. Like with Resident Evil, you had the Umbrella Corporation and its many viruses mutating or zombifying people, or, a better example, The Thing, where you had an alien monster that would enter your body and start to imitate and replace you cell by cell until you are completely replaced by the Thing imitating you. Other than the ridiculous science babble and some confusing aspects, the story is okay. The main plot itself is engaging enough, and there's some interesting twists and turns regarding Maya, who is Aya's sister, and her connection to Eve. But, like I said, it's the overcomplicated science babble that holds it back.
I think despite all this though, the game's story has a unique charm to it, even if it is a bit absurd, but the story isn't really the star of the show here. It's the gameplay sequences that truly make Parasite Eve a spectacle to behold. The story culminates into the city being evacuated so that Aya and the remaining NYPD officers can handle the situation with Eve. And while it's just an excuse not have to render tons of NPCs on screen at once, it works well and it's kind of eerie seeing a completely empty and barren Manhattan. The story will take you through various locations in New York City and concludes with a spectacular over-the-top battle with Eve, who gives birth to the ultimate being, which has a multi-sequence boss fight that is insanely frustrating as death means returning to the start of the incredibly long fight, and to make it worse, they have a chase sequence where a single mistake results in death, and yes, restarting the entire fight. Completing this without save states is a grueling task, that's for sure, as you're not even given much time to react to it. Still, you're treated to an over-the-top set of cutscenes that are incredibly impressive for the time, and I find myself marveling at how cool they are even now. Parasite's busted, and the day is saved.
As I said earlier, the views on the 5th generation's visuals are split between either crude but charming, or ugliest visuals in 3D gaming, so it can be kinda difficult to talk about. Though with that said, this game really did push the PlayStation to its limits, especially with its cutscenes. And there are a lot of them. And these are all visually beautiful cutscenes, while also being horrifying and grotesque with the people burning, melting, and creatures mutating like they were taken over by The Thing. Can you tell that The Thing is my favorite horror movie? The game also uses pre-rendered backgrounds, so like Resident Evil, there's no free camera and you view the game through camera angles. Though the amount of cutscenes is also why the game is so short. For a PlayStation RPG, this is one of the shortest RPGs on the PlayStation, with the main story lasting a total of only 7 to 9 hours. At first, I was thinking that this was more of a precursor to the cinematic games on the PlayStation. However, while it is a short game, it is a proper RPG with challenging enemies that you have to overcome by getting strong enough. In Chapter 5, there was an optional boss that I found a challenge up until I went and fought through the main areas, and believe me, you will face a lot of random encounters in the sewers, to complete a task and went back to find that it was less of a problem. Which goes to show you that you don't have to be a lengthy RPG to be a proper RPG. Besides, it's not like the RPGs in the previous 2 generations were all that long, especially if it was on the NES.
Coincidentally, The Thing is also my favorite movie. The good news is the game has one of the most interesting New Game Plus mechanics that I've ever seen. When you restart the game, you can go to the Chrysler Building and battle through an absolute gauntlet to see the true ending. It actually takes about as long as finishing the game normally anyway.
We should also once again mention the music, as Yoko Shimomura absolutely nailed it. She delivers a haunting ambient soundtrack that just completely fits with the horror-themed atmosphere of Parasite Eve like a glove. That is, up until you enter combat, however, with a theme that has an energetic beat to it that also fits the New York City setting to a T.
Like we both said throughout this entire video, you're only getting about 7 to 9 hours of the main game, but the New Game Plus will definitely bulk up your playtime, but also be quite a challenge if you're eager for more of that difficult playthrough. Your weapons and equipment carry over, as do your levels, so get ready to grind, though because I need to talk about a really odd choice when it comes to the leveling system. The game requires 900,990 experience to get to level 99, but this is where it gets odd. Levels 35 to 38 make up the vast majority of them. It literally takes over 700,000 of the total 990,000 experience needed to max level just to get to level 38. Then, oddly enough, after this, levels only take about 4,500 each to level. Oh, and you skip from level 96 to 99, at least according to the guides that I read online about the subject, because I did not have the time to grind out like this. I have no idea why it's like this, and I'm going to chalk up the developers assuming no one would ever do this. I'm not quite sure. Then again, I wonder every day why they made Icon.
Overall, Parasite Eve is a short yet excellent RPG on the PlayStation, with an excellent horror theme, one of the best combat systems I have ever seen in an RPG, a great soundtrack, and is a treat for the eyes, which really says something considering this is the PlayStation. If you're an RPG fan and someone who loves to dig into the library of older systems, this is certainly a game that you must check out.
Overall, Parasite Eve remains a charming game in the system, and one that's worthy of your time. It's a game that might have some flaws and some dated aspects, but overall it's a fantastic experience that every gamer should go through at least once. It's a ride that I'm glad I went on, and I check it off my bucket list now. Its impressive visuals and exhilarating gameplay definitely overshadow its weaker elements. This game is one that I would love some kind of remake or remaster of, but don't count on it as the rights are trapped in licensing hell due to a disagreement between Square Enix and the writer of the novel, which has gone on pretty much since the beginning of time. and I doubt that there's ever going to be a change to it. It's a shame, but at least we got 2 sequels from it, but we may never know what could have been. Wow, I ended up talking a lot more than I thought I would about a 9-hour game, but thank you to everyone for watching. Special thanks to Bonum for joining me. He actually had to play the entire game for the first time as well for making this video. He does live streaming on Twitch, and I'll leave a link to his Twitch channel in the description. You should check him out if you enjoy older games, especially from the PS1 era. He does a lot of stuff where he explores lesser talked about games, something that I'm sure everyone can tell that I really love doing on this channel. Be sure to like, subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one, and don't forget to share the video with your friends. It really helps the channel grow and reach new people. This is WizPlay, and that's enough of that.